начать сегодняшние лекции. Все лектора в сборе. Конечно, Титов и Максим Титов смог добраться до Харькова, но совершенно другие. Есть две темы. Поэтому программа полностью планируется, что полностью будет выполнена. А материал истоки Мария Лен представит.
So, good morning. This morning I'm going to give you some kind of mix of the lecture that Achilles Stocky had prepared, and I had also something on the future experiments. So I tried to merge the two to do something. So I hope it's not going to be too messy and complicated. Just do not hesitate to ask questions once again. So this was the title of my presentation, and this was the title of Achilles' presentation, and you see that he is in a way much more enthusiastic than I am, maybe. And so I hope that when you will get out of this room, you will be really convinced that not only Atlas and CMS can find new particles or new physics above the current limits, but also framework experiment can help for that. So this is the outline of the talk. So yesterday and the day before yesterday, in the two lectures I gave, I tried to show you practically and from a really deep physics point of view, which are the questions you should ask yourself when you're reading a paper or when you're doing an experiment, and how it can give you some insight on flavor physics above the current knowledge. So here I will first have a first part deeper on physics motivation and why do we want to go further, and even more how can we go further to what we know. Then after this part, which is going to be quite dense, we will have some relaxing time on, I will describe the experimental condition. So up to now, I've only spoken about LHCb. So I will tell you a little bit more about another place in the world where B physics can be done very efficiently, and how it differs from the LHC environment. Then I will discuss about practically the detectors, which are going to do this physics, and if time allows, I will give an example of a subject where both experiments can give some insight on with very different technique and methods. I should say that I don't exactly know how long this is going to take. I think it's going to take a little bit less than 2 hours, maybe 1 hour and a half. And I would tend to propose that we go, and we will do the break after this 1 hour and a half, something, if it's okay for you.
Okay.
Yes? Okay. Otherwise, we stop after 1 hour, we do a break, and we start again, but I think it's maybe better to do it in one. If it's really too, you say stop, and we do a break after 1 hour, okay?
Okay.
So, physics motivation. So this is things you should not at all try to read, it's too small. But this is a summary from Atlas of all the new particles they have searched. You see it? In various models, so this is exotics in a general way, this is supersymmetric particle search. And here is a scale in TeV, it's a log scale. Here it's 1 TeV, here it's 1 TeV. And this tells you what's the limit, okay? So you cannot read it, but you see that they have searched for a lot of particles. They found none of them. So they didn't find particle above the one predicted by the standard model up to now. And they put limit from 300 GeV to 1 point something TeV, roughly. So this was at 7 and 8 TeV. When the LHC will start again in a little bit more than 1 year from now, it will run at 13 TeV. Then it will allow to go further because the energy in the center of mass will be larger. So they will push the limit, but still it will not be orders of magnitude. So can we do something else? And the answer is of course yes, and this is what people sometimes call the quantum path. So instead of increasing the center of mass energy, you just increase a lot the precision of your measurement and the number of particles, the statistics you have, and you choose well-selected decays in order to be sensitive to physics in the loops. This is exactly some example I've described you yesterday, such as the BS2 mu plus mu minus, for example, or the measurement of phi s with BS2 jet psi phi. You remember this terribly complicated analysis where I show you all the terms and so on and so forth. This is a way to measure the effect of particles in the loops or in the box diagram. So this is really the way to go. And in fact, this is a way which was used in the past. And this is the way which said things about physics above what was known at a given date. And I'm going to start with some example of that. The first one was in fact at CERN in 1973, the discovery of what we call now the weak current and the Z0. So this was an indirect discovery. It's exactly the same philosophy as what I'm trying to explain to you, that it's something very nice to search for physics about what is known. So this was possible because in the 70s, people have learned how to produce neutrino beams. So as you all know, neutrinos particles are very weakly interacting particles, and as such are quite, how to say, difficult to handle. But people had the idea of producing neutrino beams, and this is the trick, a sketch of the trick how you can produce neutrino beam. Basically, you shoot a beam of intense proton on a target. You produce pion and kaon, charge 1. At least you keep the charge 1. Then, that's the problem with the nice weather. Okay. So you have kaon and pions. They decay in flight, and they decay to muon. When you have a muon, when they decay, they give also a neutrino mu. Okay? Always. Cloud. And then you put something in the rock, a big damper, and then you stop the muon, and you are left after with the neutrinos only, because they are weakly interacting. Okay? They are the only one which goes through. And this is roughly the way you get a neutrino beam. So, if you have a neutrino beam and you put it in for example, on a liquid target or in a bubble chamber, then you have nucleons, and either it can interact. So now I'm saying it in terms of style of Feynman graph, so taking things in advance, either through a charge current like that. So at that point, you observe a mu plus, or it can interact through a neutral current. It cannot interact like that because it's not charged, the neutrino, so you cannot have a photon there. But if you still have a neutrino mu getting out, then maybe you can have something like that. Okay? But you're not seeing directly this potential, this possible particle, okay? What you're seeing, is this and this, of course. chamber, then it means that I would have a neutral current. So this was a bubble chamber, but okay. But if you have this, you will not see it. Okay? You remember the neutrino, we do not really see them. So how can you say you have something that you haven't seen? So this is not an easy way to see. Maybe you can say, okay, I will see tracks there, but it's going to be messy, it's not going to be a clean signature. What would be a clean signature is that if instead of interacting with the nucleon, you interact with the electron and you eject an electron. This would be a clean signature. So it was a bubble chamber. So a bubble chamber, you probably studied that during your lecture. People were taking pictures of it. And in fact, this is Gargamel bubble chamber. They took 1.4 million pictures. This is huge. You can imagine 1.4 million pictures. Then people were analyzing this picture. First, some rough scanning, and then at the end, eye scanning. And they found 3 events of this type among a data taking of 2 years. So it was a huge work. But so what is that? So that's the direction of the neutrino beam, and they see an electron with a small energy aligned with the beam, and due to the kinematic, this was something they expect to be the signal. Then, of course, it's always the same, even if it was bubble chamber. It's, as for the event, the analysis I've explained you before for the BS2 mu, for example, people have to monitor the background to estimate their background contamination in order to be able to tell whether this is indeed signal and what's the level of background, and how they can be sure this is a clear indication of this type of thing. And they did it, and yes, it was a clear indication. Okay, so this was the indirect discovery of the Z0. Okay, they haven't seen the Z0, but doing analysis at an energy much lower than the mass of the Z0, they were able to indirectly probe its existence. Okay, so that's it, neutral current. Okay, so you have neutral current. So at that time, people were really looking a lot at current decay. They started to have studied the current particles, charge current, neutral current. And this was a well-known decay of the K plus 2.0 E plus neutrino. So here you have a SU coupling, you emit a W plus, which then gives you an E plus and a neutrino. Okay, so if you say kind of symmetry, if I have that, I should have that. Why not? Charge current, neutral current. So here I should have an E plus E minus. Okay, and here it's then an SD coupling. So I expect to see K plus to pi plus E plus E minus. But then it was not seen. It doesn't exist. And so that was for the question of we talked already about the gene mechanism. I will go in Sergei's lecture during mine. So the gene mechanism. So in the 70s, Glashow, Iliopoulos, and Mayani, they proposed, so there was some indication, some measurement of branching ratio. They were saying, people were measuring, that the ratio of the branching ratio, the ratio of K0 to mu plus mu minus, compared to the ratio of K plus to mu plus neutrino mu, is of the order of 10 to the minus 8. So extremely suppressed. While you would expect from a charge current to neutral current symmetry that it should be roughly the same. It's exactly as in my previous slide. If you had a symmetry between the charge current and the neutral current, it should be the same. Okay, so now if we write it more the way we think, so at that time, there was the idea of Cabibbo, so I'm not going to do, so at that point I should say that I know that probably most of you have already had particle physics lecture. For those who haven't had, it's going to be a little bit jumpy, and I cannot redo a full particle physics lecture today, so you have to say, okay, I admit that. And so at the time of Cabibbo has said that he had an up-type quark and the two down-type quarks, which were known at that time. So three quarks were known, U, D, and S. They were rotated by an angle which we call nowadays theta Cabibbo. So if I compute side bar, I obtain this, and you see here that I have this SD coupling, which is a flavor changing neutral current. Flavor changing neutral current. So you change flavor from S and to D, and it's neutral because it's the same charge. Okay? But so from that, it should exist at first order, and it's completely incompatible with the experiment which says 10 to the minus 8. So this is where Glashov-Yopoulos and Mayani arrived, and they propose the existence of a fourth quark. So it was not known, it was not measured. They just said, let's assume there is a fourth quark. So then we have, in fact, a completely new doublet. So we have this quark they propose, which goes with the S, okay? Which is rotated by the theta Cabibbo, as in the other case. Then you can compute this psi prime bar from this doublet, which you have to add to the previous coupling, which was that. Then you have this, and then the flavor changing neutral current part just disappears. Okay? So, in order to get to describe the experimental measurement, this theorist said, let's imagine we have a fourth quark, and then if I do the computation, I see that I completely, exactly cancel this flavor changing neutral current at first order, which appeared at first order. But in fact, so this is the simplified view, but the Jim mechanism is in fact much more than that. In their paper, they perform the whole calculation. I'm not going to enter at all into detail, but they show that it is not an exact cancellation. It's a cancellation which depends on the MC quark square minus MU quark square times cos theta Cabibbo sinus theta Cabibbo. What's important is the difference that you see here of MC square minus MU square. Okay? So if the C quark and the U quark have the same mass, Jim mechanism says no flavor changing neutral current at all. It's zero. Okay? If there is mass difference, then it's non-zero. Experimentally, I told you it's 10 to the minus 8 to the ratio. So it exists, it's measured. So from this measurement, they can say, we can predict that the mass of the C quark is 1.5 GeV. So the fact that people were measuring K0 to mu to be non-zero implies that it exists a C quark of mass 1.5 GeV. You get it? Yes. So this is an indirect evidence for the existence of a particle which was not directly produced. Exactly what I'm telling from the beginning, that you can feel particle above what you can produce. And this is the paper of Glashov-Yopoulos and Mayani. And in fact, I just underlined in the abstract, they said, we propose a model of weak interaction in which the currents are constructed out of 4 basic quark fields and interact with a charged massive vector boson, etc., etc. And then the next to the leading divergence respect all observed weak interaction selection rules, so observation, okay? And then they said there is a symmetry between lepton and quark because introducing the C quark, they create this doublet which goes with the muon part, while you have the other two which goes with the electron. So there are 3 main things to see, is that they want to describe an observation. It's always like that. You have a measurement, you want to describe it. Then you have symmetry, and then you can do a prediction. Oh là là. It's really a pity. It's not that often that we are sad that it's sunny weather. So what you don't see is that this type of discovery is CP violation, the first measurement of CP violation. So Sergei described it in the first introductory lectures about B physics. You remember? Yes. And this is a way, also, the measurement of CP violation, the fact that experimentally people are measuring CP violation, it's extremely small, of the order of 10 to the minus 3. But because it exists, then you know that we should have a third family. Okay? You see? You will have the slide after.
Видно? По крайней мере, лучше.
Much better. So because we are measuring CP violation of the order of 10 to the minus 3, for sure there is 3 families in the standard model. So not the 4 quarks that G mechanism was saying, but 2 more families, 1 more family, so 2 more quarks. So this was predicted, and this was in 1973 by Kobayashi and Matsukawa. And you know that at the end, much after they got the Nobel Prize. And then it was directly observed, this existence of a quark from the 3rd family in 1977, and this is the B quark. So this is another example of indirect observation of something. So the observation of CP violation is the way to set something above the threshold of Kelvin. I would like you also to notice that it is 2 10 to the minus 3. I would say that at that time, it was something extremely small, and I would say somewhat unexpected. So this is also something one should remember. Imagine what would have happened if these people would have stopped at the level of 1%. They would not have discovered CP violation. Okay? And then one would have had to wait later on, something like 4 or 5 years later, the observation of the C quark. The last example I want to use is in flavor changing neutral current in the B oscillation. Or how, at that time, studying BB bar oscillation, one was able to say that the top quark is very heavy. So this is the diagram, the box diagram, which drives BB bar oscillation with seen them several times now. But now I would like you to notice that in this diagram we have quarks which circulates in this loop, and they can be of all up-type quark, but in fact, so U, C, and T, but in fact, one can calculate things and see that the heaviest, the more effect they have on the mixing. So you're more sensitive to the T quark than to the C than to the U. So in 1987, the Argus experiment in Germany had observed these are mixing at a rate which was much larger than anticipated, let's say. And in fact, it was the first hint that the top quark was really large. So I think that in their paper they said that it is something like larger than 50 GeV. But you remember B hadrons? What's their mass? 5 GeV. Okay? So Argus, it was running at an energy of the order of 10.6 GeV. But still, they were able to say, for sure, it exists a particle, the top quark, which has a mass which is larger than 50 GeV. At that time, people were not, were a little bit saying, come on, 50 GeV, it's huge. I mean, the B is 5 GeV, so they were saying the next one is a factor 10 larger. But still, they were really right. You know that the top quark is even much more than 50 GeV, it's 170. Okay, so this is the summary. So this part, little bit of history, just to remind you that in fact one can say that the existence of the C quark, the B quark, and the T quark were discovered in an indirect way using flavor-changing neutral current. Okay, so this was history, and now let's go back to now or tomorrow. Okay, so you remember the CKM matrix? Yes. An interesting way to test the CKM matrix is to precisely measure its size. Well, it's to precisely measure its elements. So, because it's unitary, you can build all those relations. And Sergei has shown you this relation. Yes? I'm calling. I had hard time to follow Sergei. Because of this unitary, you can build 6 equations, which you can geometrically depict as triangle. This gives you an idea of the side of the triangle proportional to the Cabibbo angle. Lambda is one of the parameters of the CKM matrix, and it's sin theta Cabibbo. So, yes, I should have said this before, sorry. So this is a CKM matrix, and Wolfenstein has proposed some kind of parametrization. You know that we have only 4 parameters, okay? So he has proposed a parametrization with these 4 parameters, which exhibits the hierarchy so that it's very close to 1 on the diagonal, and it gets smaller, getting up further off the diagonal. So this is sin theta Cabibbo, it's of the order of 0.2, and then you have A, rho, and eta. So these are lambda, A, rho, and eta, the 4 parameters. And here you see that you have high, so this is where CD violation. So I can, for this 6 triangle, look at the side, in the length of the side in terms of lambda. And here you see it's lambda, lambda, lambda 5. It means it's going to be highly unbalanced. So it's going to be a triangle completely squash. This one, which is underlined in orange, is lambda 3, lambda 3, lambda 3. So it's going to be a triangle not squash, like that. So this is what people are calling the unitary angle. So this one, we want to measure its side as well as the three angles. If there is new physics, then maybe it's not going to be a triangle which close, maybe the angle which will not match the side and so on. So here, I have shown you how you can express the side, so AB, AC, as a function of the Wolfenstein parameter, as well as the angle alpha, beta, gamma, as a function of the parameters. So, the idea now is just to give you a feeling of how all those measurements that you have already seen some picture of can be done. So the first one is the simultaneous rate of B decays, and I think that Sergei has explained you how it's measured. And the idea here is just to measure the B gives pi LU, and then here, because you have a VUB, and if you look at B gives a GLU, it gives you a VCB here. So if you measure the semi-electronic rate of B to pi LU and B to GLU, then you measure VUB square and VCB square, and then you can measure the AC length, and the AC length is this one. So measuring it means that you just draw a circle around 0, which is the point 0, 0, of a fixed length, which is AC from your measurement. So it's a circle, but of course it has the width is due to the experimental uncertainty and to the theoretical one, which allows you to go from the measured rate to the CKM matrix parameter. And same is true for other things. So you remember the angle gamma? I described you how we measure the angle gamma using B to decay. I spent a long time to explain you the measurement of, this was the first measurement of CP violation I described. So this is a way to measure gamma. And so if you measure gamma, you measure an angle, which is this angle. And because there is an uncertainty, it's not a straight line like that you change. There is a width due to the experimental uncertainty. Similarly, when you measure the rate of BB-bar oscillation, you can show that it's a circle, but centered in one, that you draw like that, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to explain all of them. But at the end, you have a lot of measurements, okay? And they draw a constraint in this rho eta plane. And then you superimpose all of them, and you try to see whether they draw the same triangle or not. So, this is it. So, you see, it's really messy. Okay, but at the end, it's a superposition or what I have described, plus the one I've shown without describing. And this small ellipse is the result of a kind of, let's say, chi-square fit, taking into account all the measurements and expressing them in terms of rho and eta, and finding the preferred rho and eta from all those measurements. And the rho and eta give you that point. So, at which rho and at which eta. So, it's hardly visible, but you can see rho and eta. It's 0.13 plus or minus 0.02, 0.35 plus or minus 0.01. So, it means they are known to 15%, 4% in the other case. So now they are quite precisely measured. And what is more important than that is that it seems that all the measurements are compatible. Okay? My circle from VUB to VCB allows the same region that the measurement of sin to beta, and so on and so forth. There is compatibility, which we can say in more time matrix with its single complex parameter, the phase, is able to describe all CP violations that we see in our data. So the CP violation that we see in our data in the stand is compatible with the standard model. Okay, at that point, you should say, okay, no. Why are we still interested in all that? It works, it's sad, but it works. So I'm opening a parenthesis here just for those maybe not so familiar with particle physics and all those big questions, and just to let you dream a little bit. So, I told you everything works with the standard model. Very good. But you probably know that CP violation is one of the big questions nowadays, and that's why people are still studying it a lot. Because when we are right now in a universe which is made of matter, wherever we look, we don't see sign of significant part of antimatter. There are some, okay, we can produce an accelerator, of course. There are some in the high energy cosmic rays, but there is no sign of a huge amount of antimatter in the universe. And there is no sign neither that we have a part of the universe which are purely made of antimatter, because at the limit, at the border between the two, we would see some annihilation. So, what happened? This is one of the big questions, as you probably all know. At the time of the Big Bang, people are thinking that there were equal amount of matter and antimatter. Today we are living in a world of matter, so reasonably people are thinking that CP violation mechanism should be a clue towards beyond standard model physics. But up to now, this was disappointing. So maybe it's a more tiny effect that we haven't yet measured. Maybe it's in fact CP violation in the leptonic sector, so in the neutrino sector, which is the clue, but people really are thinking that studying CP violation may open a door towards physics beyond the standard model physics. End of the parenthesis. Alors, okay, so we want to see whether we are able to put constraint or to assess new contribution from new physics in our data. And this is quite a delicate thing, and often it is model dependent. What I mean there is that a theorist builds a model, some kind of SUSY model, other models, and say, okay, I predict that you should see this effect. Very good. But from an experimental point of view, when you measure something, it's very difficult to give a constraint on all over possible models. So this is, however, if you go to conferences, people discussing around a cup of tea or coffee, they say, oh, we think that we agree that we have limited the new physics amplitude compared to the standard model 1 at the order of 20%. So they cannot be more than 20% of the standard model. So now I'm going to try to explain you how is it done. So roughly, people agree that new physics, if it exists, the effect is not larger than 20% of the effect you can see in the standard model. So a way to go beyond is effective theory. So effective theory looks, but in fact it was used for a long time, and effective theory, from a theoretical point of view, sometimes you cannot be very happy with them, they cannot be non-renormalizable and that type of thing, but still, it's not because you have a theory which is non-renormalizable that you should not be happy. For example, Fermi theory is not renormalizable, but it works very well. In case of beta decay, it works very well. So the idea energy, you say there is a more complete theory at high energy, but for my low energy stuff, I have something which is able to describe my data. And this is exactly, if you write the matrix element completely with the propagator, you have, for the weak interaction, MW squared minus Q squared, but at when Q squared is much smaller than MW squared, it's like that, which here, you can say that G squared divided by MW squared is the Fermi constant, decay constant, okay? The constant. So this is exactly the same trick we are going to play. So this is the way people are using it to put limit on the new physics contribution. So all this, the idea is to say, for any amplitude, which is given from the standard model contribution, I'm adding a new physics contribution, okay? Which has a coupling, as I have a coupling in the standard model, G Fermi, for example, I have a scale in the standard model, MW squared, and here I have a scale which I will call lambda new physics. Okay? So it's the exact copy, nothing more. So, now, from that, because you're adding a coupling and a scale, you see that whatever you measure, you will either constrain very strongly the coupling and very weakly the scale, or vice versa. Yes? Everybody agrees with that? Okay, no? Hey, très bien, yes. Somebody care? I have the coupling and the scale, okay? So this is my new amplitude A. I'm telling it's an A0. So if I would have only standard model, it would be A0. I call everything, I put everything A0 times the coupling of the standard model divided by MW squared. Okay? This is the standard model part. Now, okay? Merci. Now, I'm adding a new physics part. This part. Okay? Yeah. Now, I'm measuring it. So, this I know I can predict. So then, I can put a constraint on that part. Yes? Okay. So I can put a constraint on that part. It means I can put a constraint on C divided by lambda squared. Not on lambda. I cannot say the new physics scale is less than 1 TeV, 10 TeV. I can only say if the coupling is equal to 0.1, then the new physics scale is 1 TeV. Yes? Okay. Very good. So, in order to, so this is the idea. Now, in order to be able to see how we can, I told you 20%. So, let's rewrite it as a ratio. It's easier to constrain. So, let's say that my measurement tells me that I do not differ from the amplitude by more than a factor R. R can be 20%, 0.2, okay? So it means that C divided by lambda new physics squared is smaller than square root of R. And here I knew I had it. I think I have something weird there. Okay. So you focus on that. I tried to write that because I found it more clear, but I think there are square root everywhere. So.
May I ask a question?
Yes, you can.
What is lambda in new physics?
Okay. This is the scale where the new physics shows up.
Is it some mass or what?
Yes. For example, 1 TeV, mass where you expect some SUSY particle.
It's mass of some particle, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes. So, you say I limit by the amplitude by 20%. It gives me a limit on C over lambda square by square root of, so you forget this formula. And then this is the standard model coupling, so VTV, VTQ, because I'm looking at flavor changing neutrons, so that's B in C, divided by LW squared. So now it's still the same. I have to do some hypothesis. So which hypothesis can I do? So this is exactly the same. So for the standard model, I am adding some new physics. So this was the BB bar mixing. You remember it was the same diagram with a W and here the top quark circulating. I have not written the U and C because they are smaller contribution. Then somebody has thought about supersymmetric new physics, and then you have other particles circulating, chargino, storm, weird thing. I don't even want to know what they are. But they give me a scale, the new physics scale, and you have coupling from the standard model particle to this stuff, for example. So this is the new physics scale. So let's do some assumption that the coupling is 1. This is the largest you can have. So then you see that the new physics scale limit you can put, now you're able to do something. It's 10 over square root of R, so you obtain this very easily from that. In case of BD mixing, or 2 over square root of R in case of BS mixing. Okay? This is huge. We will see some number later on. Now, so this is one extreme. The couplings are 1. The other extreme is when the couplings are very small, such as small as in the standard model. This is something people are calling minimal flavor violation. And this is something where you say it's the smallest assumption I can have for the new physics. And here, in that case, the coupling are as small as the second matrix element, so I'm just saying that they are the same. So I simplify this formula, and then I can say the scale of new physics is 0.08 root of R. So you see 0.08 instead of 2 or 10. So much, much weaker limit I can put on the new physics scale. Of course, it makes sense. Here, the new physics particles are coupling maximum. Here, they are coupling much weaker way. So this is, okay, graphically shown whatever better things. I skip all the graph now because I can't see them. So, here, this is a table which gives you some numbers to give you a feeling. So here I have R, you know, the ratio of new physics toward the standard model. So if I have 20, my limit is 20%, so if I measure something to 20%, 10%, 1%. What limit can I set on the new physics scale? If it is order 1 coupling, then I can say today already, because 20% is already today, the new physics scale is larger than 20 TeV, which means it will never be formed by LHC directly. This new physics particle cannot be produced. If it's not a strong coupling, so coupling equal 1, but minimal flavor violation, then the limit is 180 GeV. Okay? It means that if these particles are of the order of mass of 190 GeV, I should see their effect in flavor physics. But on the other side, we know that Atlas and CMS has not formed observable for part. So we know that it seems that the new physics is not at a mass of few hundred GeV, or is incredibly weakly coupling to the standard model particle. And this is something which people sometimes are calling the flavor problem. It's really strange. If new physics exists, and we all hope it exists, and we have good reason to think it exists because of this matter-antimatter, for example, thing, or because we have something we call a dark matter that. So there is something beyond the standard model. Everybody thinks there is something, but this something is really strangely behaving with respect to flavor physics. So, in fact, just to bring you a little bit on Earth, that's the way we are doing it. So people are saying, okay, let's assume I have new physics in the BB bar mixing with a C here, so something like so it can be from 0 to 1 and with a phase. So it's a ratio of the amplitude, okay? Ratio of all compared to standard model. So Hamiltonian with standard model plus new physics and here standard model. It will modify all the, not all parameters, all observables, sorry, which have something to do with BB bar mixing, because I put new physics in BB bar mixing. So it will change the delta M, d delta ms, so the mixing frequency. It will change sine to beta, the CP violation in the BD, in the interference between mixing and decay. It will change delta ms. It will change phi s. You remember the phi s we measured on LHCb with the terrible analysis? So this will not be anymore the standard model phi s. So from all the measurements, people are taking all experimental measurements and they say, what can I say on C and phi, the amplitude of new physics and its phase. So this is for the BD and for the BS. So you see here C, you don't really see, but this is C, so from 0 to 2, and this is phi in degree from -20 to +20. So the red cross is the point at 1, 0. 1, 0 is no new physics. Okay? Then the blue region are the 68 and 95% confidence level region obtained from the data. And you see that it's on the top of the cross. So this is for BD, it's exactly the same for BS that you don't see, but it's also the cross. So what do you conclude from that? Huh? No new physics, yes, but this is not quantitative enough. So no new physics up to, so from point, so C, let's focus on C. C is from 0.8 to about 1.4 something at 95% confidence level. So you can say at 95% confidence level, at maximum, I'm about 20%, I see a 20-30% effect. Okay? So this is, you remember I told you R is on the order of 20%. So the new physics contribution is about 20% based on the standard model at maximum. So this comes from this type of analysis. Okay, so I understand that some of you are a little bit lost. But you should not worry. This is really what is shown in some in the conferences, and at that point I'm really exposing you to something which is not that simple, but just to give you a feeling how it works in real life, and these are the latest results. So this is a little summary of what I've said up so far. So the indirect search for new physics through the virtual effect has been quite successful in the past years. People are still pushing for it, and in a way, it's also, imagine that Atlas and CMS will find new physics. Okay? They find a new particle, a star or something. So what is going to be fixed? What I will know if Atlas and CMS finds a particle. Here, what I will know. Huh?
The constraints of the pressure.
No. I will know lambda. I will not know C. So then you will still need a flavor physics to see the coupling. With all of them. They will, I've seen something they will see also, of course they can, but they will measure the mass, they will have some information of some couplings, but this with this, they will do still need new things. So what we know is that CP violation and flavor changing neutral current in the standard model are happening at the loop level. In the standard model, they are really due to the weak interaction. They are suppressed by the CKM matrix element. The CP violation comes from a single source in the standard model, but then we haven't seen new physics. We think that there is no reason why new physics should behave as the quarks in the standard model. So minimal flavor violation is just an ad hoc way to parameterize things, and it has not proven to be true at all. So people now are really making a lot of use of that, but there is no reason why it is true. There are some tests you can do, and this, one of the very powerful tests, is the BS to mu mu compared to the BD to mu mu. Remember that I showed you yesterday. So in fact, if you measure the BS to mu mu branching ratio, okay, it has been measured, not precisely, but, and then with more data you can measure the BD to mu mu. In minimal flavor violation model, they expect to be highly correlated. So if you do both measurements, you will be able to say whether this minimal flavor violation is indeed the framework where people should work. But this is, for example, what LHCb has. So this is the BS, and this is the BD. Clearly, you need much more data in order to perform this type of measurement than what we have currently at hand.
May I ask a question?
Yes?
This is an experiment about our...
This one? This one? No. This one is a prediction from this minimal flavor violation model like. But they say that it should be in those, okay, they have parameters in the model, so it can be any one of these green points, but it should be in this region.
So these green points are generated by Monte Carlo?
By their model, yes. It takes into account the uncertainty on the VUB, on the CKM matrix element, and so on and so forth. It takes all theoretical uncertainty. Okay, so it means that we need to go for other experiments which will bring you more data in order to perform a test with a precision larger than 20%. Okay. And currently, there are two experiments which will be able to do that in the future. One is the upgrade of the HCB detector, and the other one is BEL2, which is the successor of BEL in Japan. So I'm going to explain you a little bit what is the experimental environment in Japan. So it should be more relaxing than the first part. So I want to spend some time because it's very, very, very different. So LHCb, we know already, PP collision, LHC, a lot of tracks, a huge energy in the center of mass. working at the epsilon 4s. I will come back to that. But the epsilon 4s is a 10.6 GeV mass particle. So much, much lower energy. A huge intensity. You will see a luminosity which is extremely high, but a quite clean environment. So this is a real event from Bell. So Bell has run at on this accelerator in the beginning of the it's in 2000. It started in 1999, and you see this is a Bell event. So the beams are going. So you see how clean it is. It's not that they have removed the tracks from the display. It's just all what you have in your event. So only the tracks of the decay. So what happened? You collide an E plus and an E minus. You create an epsilon 4s particle which decays extremely fast to a B bar, so a B0 meson, B0 bar meson, or B plus, B minus. And that's all. There is no hadronization tracks. There is only these two B meson. So only what you are interested in. So it's a very nice one. Bell 2, in order to reach a huge number of events, they will have to increase a lot the intensity in the beam, and this will give you more background, synchrotron radiation, related background, and you see that the event display has a much more, I mean there is more background, but still the 4 tracks, the few tracks are very easy to see. So what is this epsilon 4s? So the epsilon is the family of the BB bar resonance. That's, by the way, looking at the epsilon peak that people have discovered, have directly produced the big quark. I told you that the big quark was discovered measuring CP variation in a Keon. So this is the epsilon family, epsilon 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s. And this is the only one which has a mass large enough to decay into BB bar pair. So that's the one people are using to produce BB bar at the so-called B factories. It was called B factories because they produce a huge number of B as a factory producing a huge number of solutions. So, just to give you an idea of the cross-section, the B cross-section is about 1 nanobar, the C is 1.3, the U and D S. So you see this number? So it's what? The B cross-section is larger than the light quark flavor cross-section. You see? And if you go back in one of my very first slides, you remember maybe I told you that at LHC, the light flavor are produced 160 times more than the B. So here you have more B than light. At LHC, you have 160 times more light than B. So it's a completely different environment. At Bell, you don't need to have a trigger. It's amazing. And you just record all your events. The efficiency, you just record all your events. It's very easy. You just give a little bit that if you want not to have too many, but just record the event. And you have an efficiency on recording the event of 99 point something. So you don't have to worry at all about the trigger. It's a very convenient, very much easier from that point of view. So you can say, why aren't you doing everything at like that? You will see that there are some difficulties. Okay, so just to, okay. So this is a way a BB bar pair is produced schematically. So I told you that the mass of the epsilon 4s is 10.6 GeV. The mass of the B is about 5.3. It means that the B plus and B0 will be produced nearly at rest in the epsilon 4s rest time. They have a P of about 300 MeV, if I remember correctly. The BS has a mass which is about 3.37. It cannot be produced. So, at B factories, one can produce only B0, B0 bar, or B plus, B minus, and they are produced at rest. And because of the L of the epsilon 4s, they are produced with in the L equal 1 state, which is a kind of a problem, because of course you want to measure CP violation. And if you start to, you remember that we compute the CP violation rate, and there was a C cosine delta m t plus S sine delta m t, and let's take Cheb psi phi, for example, or psi k. Cheb psi phi is BS, it's a bad example. Let's take Cheb psi k short for BD, then S is sine to beta, and C equals 0. If you would do a time-integrated measurement, then you integrate, but you will integrate sine delta mt, and it will be 0. So no measurement of CP violation possible. So then people have to measure the time. But if you produce an epsilon for S, you produce 2b at rest, how can you measure the time? You have to find a trick, okay? So the idea is to build an asymmetric collider in order to be able to measure the time between the two decays. So this is it. So the B factories are asymmetric. The electron and positron beam do not have the same energy, so that the epsilon 4s flies, it decays into a BB bar. Okay? Then imagine that at that point you start you decide to start, one of the B is going to decay first. Let's call it B1. And then you start the clock at that time. Because of quantum coherence, you know that the other is in the B bar state, and it will decay sometimes later. So you can have, and then you can measure delta Z between the two, and delta Z is related to the time. So either you are in this configuration, or in this, where it's the B1, well, it's this one, the green one has decayed. So because of the boost, you will be able to measure delta Z. And because you are able to measure delta Z, you know T. And you are able to measure CP violation. So, but I remind you that it is, this is one of the main difficulties at B factories. You want to measure that. But the light is linked to the lifetime of the beta gamma of the CETO of the B, and then the beta gamma. The CETO of the B is 450 microns. It's small. So you need to have a beta gamma which is large enough to measure it. And what people do is they give a boost of the order of 0.5, a little bit less, 0.4 something, and then they obtain a flight distance which is 180 microns. This is very small. From a detector point of view, it's quite challenging. So you can say, why do they give a higher boost? But if you give a higher boost, you have a detector which is getting more asymmetry, you're losing hermeticity, and so on and so forth. So this is complicated, and this is one of the main difficulties. At LHC, you remember, the flight was 1 centimeter. Here it's 180 microns. So it's much cleaner and so on and so forth, but the distance are much more difficult to measure. And the other problem is that you have only B, 0, D, or charge B. Not BS, not B hadron, not B baryon. Okay, so I think I will skip that. It's some explanation on how it's working and how you can select nicely the signal, but it's in the slide, it's not complicated. Just one big advantage of B factory is the tagging. You remember the tagging? We discussed the tagging yesterday, saying it's a B or a B bar. And because of the so clean environment, the tagging is working much, much better. So this was the tagging of LHCb, you remember, 3%. Quite bad. This is the one from a previous B factory experiment, which is called Radar, but you don't care. It's measured on data as this one, and it's about 30%, so 10 times better. So if you have 1,000 events reconstructed, it's equivalent to 300 perfectly tagged at bFactory, but only 30 at LHCb. So this is one of the big advantages of the bFactory. Their tagging efficiency, their tagging power is much larger because you have less tracks and a cleaner environment, basically. So if we put all together, well, you don't see, but forget about that. But the idea is that both are very powerful, both are allowing to do measurement. There are very different experimental advantages and problems. So they are very complementary, and these are very important to have both type of experiment because the systematic uncertainty are very different. So at that point, I think I will not discuss the LHCb upgrade. The point is just, I will flash it very rapidly. The idea is something which is going to happen in 2018, okay? And the main thing to remember, the idea is to be able to read out the detector at full LHC speed. So at 40 megahertz, you read all the detector, and you put everything to a huge CPU file, which will reconstruct the event and which will be able to select whether it's interesting or not. I just want to underline that this is a challenging thing from a DAQ, so data acquisition point of view. So here you see, for the 4 LHC experiment, ALICE, ATLAS, CMS, and LHCb, the event size. So the event size of LHCb in kilobytes is quite small, 100 kilobytes, smaller than the other. So this one is about 4,000. ALICE is very large. Do you know why ALICE has such a large event? No. No, it's not a larger detector than ATLAS and CMS. It's smaller. What do they do at ALICE?
Heavy ion analyzer.
Exactly. So they have these 1,000, 2,000 tracks because of lead-lead collision. Okay, so this is why the events are much larger than ATLAS and CMS. Now, so now what is the rate people want to read out their detector? Okay, and you see that LHCb wants to read out the detector at 40 megahertz. Okay, so this is in kilohertz. Much larger than all the other experiments. It means that at the end, the bandwidth one needs to have is 32,000 gigabits per second, which is equivalent to what CMS is planning to have. But it will happen 3 years before. So it's a quite challenging thing, and people are really working a lot to do it. But if we are able to do that, and we think we will be able, it will mean that we will really write the whole event, reconstruct it, and run the reconstruction program and select the event as efficiently as what we want. So it will allow us to increase significantly the efficiency on all hadronic modes. I told you when you have a muon, it's easy from a trigger point of view. But when you have no muon, it's much more complicated. And with that, it will be much easier. So I'm not going to describe at all what's going to change for the detector. So not only we will read out at 40 megahertz, we will also change some part. You can look everything in the slide. I just want to say a word on Bell 2, because Bell 2, so it's in Japan. They will reuse what was used for Bell, so this E plus E minus ring at the Upsilon 4S. They will change the accelerator in order to be able to have much larger luminosity. And this is their luminosity as a function of time. So from last 2 years, 2012 So this is the peak luminosity, and this is the integrated luminosity. They want to run at 10 to the 35, you see? 8 to the 35. It's a huge peak luminosity, much larger than it has been done at plus and minus before. And this is maybe more interesting, it's the integrated luminosity. In red, it's what the previous B factory has had, about 1 inverse attobarn, summing 2 experiments, Babar and Bell. And then it's what they expect to have, starting really in 2018. Here it's going up to 50 inverse attobarn in 2020 to 23. So it's a huge number of events. At the same time, so this is the LHCb upgrade, which will take place roughly at the same time. So it's going to be in 4 years, from now, it's going to be a very interesting time because both will produce results. So this is a sketch of the Bell 2 detector. It doesn't look like at all as LHCb. Why? Less particle, yes, but kinematically, LHCb is the 2 big quarks are produced very near the beamline. It's a spectrometer like that. Here, you have an epsilon 4s, which decays into a BB bar. Okay, it's slightly boosted, so it's slightly boosted like that, but still, it's a wide opening. So you have to have a detector which is more or less 4 pi. So it looks like more Atlas or CMS from a volume point of view. But they are much smaller. You see the size of the person? I bet you've seen some, maybe you will see some CMS detector, and they are much, much larger, about 3 to 4 times. But LHCb is taking data now. So Bell 2 has to take care of that and to focus on modes where LHCb cannot say anything. And these are examples of modes where LHCb cannot say anything. If you look at those modes, you will see that either they contain neutrino, or photon, or pi0 photon and k-short. So experimentally, these are the modes where working in an hadronic collider as LHC makes you unable to measure them. Okay. So they focus on those modes which they can bring something which cannot be measured elsewhere. This is an example. This is B to tau nu. So this is a decay, and in the standard model, there is a W, and then you have the 2 leptons. It's very rare in the standard model. But if you go to beyond standard model, so for example with a charge charge X there, then you modify the standard model, or the branching ratio in the standard model by a factor which depends on the X mass and on the tangent beta, which is a SUSY parameter. Why do you want to look at that? Because right now, this is the measurement, and this is, so branching ratio here, this is the angle beta, don't really care. And this is the measurement, and this is what you would expect from the standard model. And you see it's slightly off. Not significantly, but slightly off. In future, they will have a precision at the end like that. So if something is really there, they should be able to say something which would be significant. So this is why this is interesting to study those type of modes. So I think you are probably more or less all dead. So I think I'm going to stop here because I think it's going to be too much. So just this very two small slides and then I really stop. So an important and interesting thing is to check for the photon polarization. Okay. in the standard model, when you have a decay, okay, otherwise I don't worry. Alors, where should I write today? No. Okay, I will have twice. When you have GS gamma, like that, okay. You know that because you know that the photon, the polarization, the photon should be left-handed if the V quark and the S quark is of mass 0, it should be completely left-handed. Okay, this is standard model. If you have new particles circulating in the loops, then you may have a photon polarization which is not left-handed anymore. And this is something you want to measure. Because again, it would be a sign of physics beyond the standard model. And people have found many ways to measure it. The first one is to use CP violation, which is sensitive to this right-handed part, which is standard model 1. So these two are CP violation type thing, sensitive to the amplitude. And then you can use something like B2 star mu I showed you, but exploring the very low Q square region where the E plus E minus pair is coming from the photon. Experimentally, these are very different. This can be done only at Bell 2. You have a B0, so you can do it at Bell 2. It decays into a K star 0, which has to decay into a K short pi 0 and a photon. It means that you should reconstruct the decay point of your B without any charge track pointing to the vertex. This is extremely complicated experimentally and only doable here. This uses BS, so it can be only done at LHCb because BS are not produced at the epsilon 4s. And this, in fact, can be done at LHCb and Bell 2. And here we will see who is going to make it first. So I'm not going to give you any details. Everything is in the slide. Both, in all cases, these are challenging analyses, but theoretically quite interesting. I mean, this will be an interesting insight towards the new physics. Just the last point. So you remember this triangle I showed you? We can do a lot of measurement, and it's still going on. This is a zoom of the rho and eta, the preferred value. So I zoomed here to show you what we have today. Now, in future, in 2022, when Bell 2 will have finished and the LHCb upgrade will have finished, taking data and analyzing them, hopefully we will be in this situation. So you recognize all the measurements I described before, but with much smaller, so this is the same scale, huh? The same X and Y scale, with much smaller uncertainty. It means that the measurement will be much, much more precise, but although the theoretical uncertainty will have decreased, because in several cases, to go from your measurement to your rho and eta parameter, you need theory, lattice QCD, other computation from QCD, and it means that you not only need to improve your experimental sensitivity and to do a better analysis, you also need to improve your theoretical computation. And doing so, maybe you will be in this situation. Do you think this is a standard model situation? Okay, why? Impression, okay. But yeah, you're correct, it's not. Because what happened? These two, this one, learning is going on in the loops. You have to do more measurement. You have to do to try to understand which is going in which is going. But clearly, they cross here, they cross here. Something is going on. Okay. So hopefully it will be what will happen. So this is the end of this lecture. I hope you survived it and it was not too complicated. But really what you should come back home with is that flavor physics is a very powerful tool to explore high energy scales that you don't directly produce, but that you feel in the decay, in the branching ratio measurement, in some angular analysis measurement, in several ways. Flavor physics in the past has always been a major actor of discovery, and I still think that it will be in the future. And all that is really a game of scale and coupling. If new particles are discovered at the LHC by Atlas and CMR, flavor physics will allow to measure the coupling, will help to measure the coupling and to study the flavor structure of these new particles. And if not, if nothing is discovered, then some limits higher could be set by flavor physics. And this will be, all that will be the task of the LHCb and the BEL2 experiments.